I'm David Bank, and from ImpactAlpha, this is an Agents of Impact podcast.
Our job at the Ford Foundation is to raise awareness around the fact that economic growth is impossible in a zero-sum economy.
That's Roy Swan, Director of Mission Investments at the Ford Foundation and author of Positive Sum, How Zero-Sum Thinking Broke Capitalism and How We Can Fix It. I spoke with Roy about shareholder primacy, patriotic capitalism, and how AI is finally making externalities, positive and negative, visible and actionable. Full disclosure, the Ford Foundation is an investor in ImpactAlpha. Roy Swan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, David. As I've told you every time I see you, you just bring so much excitement and joy and energy in every room you're in. So thanks for having me.
Oh, that's so great to hear, Roy. I appreciate that. And I will say the book brought me a lot of energy and joy. It's a great read. It's called Positive Sum, How Zero-Sum Thinking Broke Capitalism, How We Can Fix It. And it's a terrific read. It's full of stories, and it's also full of kind of economic lessons that even a liberal arts major like me can absorb. So I really appreciated it. And I will say that the opening story just sent shivers through me. You tell the story of breaking your back in a football game. Just tell us how that affected your life.
It was the best thing that ever happened to me. It didn't feel like that at the moment, but what it did, well, yeah, I know. State, can you be more Captain Obvious? Uh, it shifted the focus of my life away from football and the path I may have taken in that direction, which would not have been the elite academic schools. It would have been more football-oriented schools or sports-oriented schools. And because I couldn't play football anymore, in fact, it wasn't clear I was going to be able to walk again, I had to rely on something else. I wasn't quite as good at track and field as I was at football, but I had good grades and I'm a good test taker. So I came to the attention of some academic schools for track. So that it changed my whole life, put me on a different path, opened up a whole new world.
And you use it in the book to say, a different way of thinking enabled you to, for starters, recover, and then secondly, as you said, move in this direction. And it's kind of a metaphor, I think, for a whole different way of thinking that you're advocating more broadly. And the book really challenges a lot of kind of the conventional thinking around economics that is, zero sum. So just give us the sort of high level. You say this zero-sum thinking is kind of sunsetting and there's a positive-sum future, a great illumination, a positive-sum singularity that's on its way. What's the opportunity here?
Yeah, so those grand phrases are indications that I want to think big and I want others to think big. And I wouldn't say that there's a sweeping move towards positive sum. I'm hoping the wind is at our backs. But my job here at the Ford Foundation, we're in the business of hope and inspiration. And one of the things that I've learned over time is that we are operating under collective illusions. So let's talk about impact investing for a minute. The minute the words come out of your mouth and you say it in many audiences, there's an automatic assumption that there's trade-offs involved, zero sum. If you want to have positive social impact, that means you got to give up some financial return. That is pure zero sum, and people automatically think that. So that may have come from Princeton University, which is my alma mater. There were two mathematicians who are important contributors to the notion. One created the notion that in order for someone to win, someone else has to lose. That was John von Neumann. Then comes along John Nash, who was the colorful mathematician, later Nobel Prize winner, who was featured in the movie A Beautiful Mind. Russell Crowe played the role spectacularly. And John Nash said, well, that's not exactly true. Life, all of life is not zero sum. There are situations where everyone can win. Cooperation, human nature favors cooperation, even though fear can make us feel like life is zero sum. So, our job at the Ford Foundation is to raise awareness around the fact that economic growth is impossible in a zero sum economy. We are living in a positive sum economy. It's not clear to people that we are because um, if you think about how income gaps and wealth gaps widen, it's because one group is taking a greater share of the spoils in a growing economy. So the goal here is to have fun with history, have fun with psychology and economics, et cetera, in the book. Bring some surprising facts together, draw upon some colorful people and facts and so forth, and hopefully convince folks that you actually can do well and do good. I think most people would want to. A lot of people are afraid, particularly investors. They think that if you're going to have social impact, you're going to lose something. On the other hand, that's just not true. And but I want people to have fun learning about why it's not true.
And you go back to kind of first principles, or sort of, the sort of, totemic texts, Adam Smith and then also Milton Friedman. And it's not necessarily what people think or what they've taken away from those. If you actually read it, which I know you have, the takeaway is quite different.
Yeah. So this is someone once said, if you want to hide something from people, put it in a book. And so I just remember feeling this sense of confusion around the two kind of godfathers. I guess Adam Smith was kind of the OG of capitalism, like he's wrote in 1776, The Wealth of Nations. And then Milton Friedman comes later. They're both supposed to be free marketeers, but I never understood this notion of ruthless free marketeer, invisible hand, amoral markets from Adam Smith, who wrote The Wealth of Nations, when his first book was actually called The Theory of Moral Sentiments. I'm like, well, how does someone write about the theory of moral sentiments and then say capitalism should be amoral, ignore morals and ethics? And then you have Milton Friedman. I never understood how he was both the father, so-called father of ruthless shareholder primacy capitalism, when he also sort of invented universal basic income. So that made me want to read the original materials. I read both Theory of Moral Sentiments, Wealth of Nations, and then I read very carefully that pretty short essay, The Social Responsibility of Businesses to Increase Its Profits. I think that's the title. And I realized we've been operating under a collective illusion based on what was abridged information we may have gotten it from our schools that may have helped teach a few lessons, but was not telling the whole story. And if you understand the whole story, you then understand that Adam Smith saw a form of capitalism that required morals and ethics in order to have an, a healthy economic system. And Milton Friedman, in that famous essay, he actually says, of course, you're going to follow the rules of the game, which meant paying taxes and following regulations. Of course, you're going to take care of workers and communities, because how else are you going to maximize the value of your business? So it's just really simple reading. But I cover a lot of topics like that in the book. And again, the goal was to be fun, relatable, interesting, something that a high school senior would be interested in and maybe, smile or laugh. And that a university professor, a business school professor, might say, "Oh, I didn't know about that little tidbit."
and the misinterpretation of those kinds of things, and it's gotten, institutionalized in all sorts of ways. And you go through a very interesting history of Justice Powell, Supreme Court Justice, and how he, in a sense, foisted the misinterpretation. But the misinterpretation comes with a huge cost to society, in all kinds of things, in workplace relations, in immigration policy, in healthcare. So the flip side of that is the opportunity for this positive sum idea.
Yeah, I found some really intriguing research along the way that covers the cost of an economy that is based on zero sum thinking, which is sort of winner take all, as opposed to positive sum, which is we all win when we all win. So I'll start with some research by, I think it was Gallup. I always get these polling places, may have been Pew. But the research said it estimated that roughly $10 trillion per year is lost globally in the economy because of disengaged workers, which are estimated to be anywhere from 70 to 80% of all workers disengaged. That means you're not thinking about doing a good job at work because you think your employer, your manager doesn't really care about you, so you become alienated. The other research that really struck me was conducted by Professor Zeynep Tun at the MIT Sloan School. She's an operations research expert, and she has spent the better part of her career trying to figure out how to make jobs better for everyone. So she's got something called the Good Job Strategy. And it's her research is filled with volumes of case studies that show that when a company has great culture, its performance is better in all market conditions because everyone's rowing in the same direction. Everyone feels like it's a team. There's empathy in the C-suite. Pete Stavros at KKR has proven this over and over with his broad-based employee ownership strategy and his finding around empathy in the C-suite being a competitive advantage. I mean, he even created something called the Empathy Gym, because he believes there's a Stanford Business School professor, I think, that he partnered with because they believe empathy can be taught. So when I thought about impact investing from an impact investing perspective, and you think about putting more of the Ford Foundation's resources towards its mission, what better effort than like a quality jobs effort, which involves making life better for everyone that works at a company, sharing ownership of the company more broadly, generates better resilience, it lowers attrition, it increases innovation, increases productivity, increases profitability. It's, in my opinion, it's what foundations should be doing. And we're all serving society. We're all about advancing the human welfare. What better way to advance the human welfare than to advance the quality of life of every working person, some of whom are single, some of whom have families? What better way to build a great society?
And so this brings us to sort of your day job, I guess, as it were, heading mission investment for the Ford Foundation. And there's $1 billion carve out from the endowment that you've been investing, including in quality jobs, including in affordable housing, including, I think, in emerging market kind of economic development. And have you been able to see kind of positive sum in action in the portfolio and in some of the investments you've made?
Without a doubt. We invest in multifamily affordable rental housing. The U.S. has a massive shortage of affordable housing, and we find developers, private equity managers who invest in this type of housing. And it's not just, as an old buddy of mine from Morgan Stanley would say, it's not just self storage facilities for humans. We find the best landlords who create quality residences that people are proud to call home. We do global health care, um, the quality jobs. We also have a responsible technology focus. So all our areas of focus, financial inclusion, it's all about advancing human welfare with the caveat that while we're generating all this positive social impact, we also have a P&L we're running. So in order for the Ford Foundation to maintain its perpetual existence, we have to generate a pretty high long-term financial return. It's our spend rate. So there's a law that says foundations have to spend at least 5% of their resources endowment every year, and we spend a little more than that. And then you got inflation because if you want to be a perpetual endowment, you need to maintain your purchasing power if you can. So that creates roughly a 9% ish long term return target. That is not easy to achieve. Um, but so far, so good for us. We've exceeded our expected return and our financial hurdle rate. So wish us luck for a continued bright future.
Yeah, well, I do. But one thing that's always struck me, and I know there's a handful of foundations that are making mission related investments, as you say, from the endowment, the distinction being whether it's on the endowment side or the grant side. But the list is not growing as fast as I think many folks thought maybe a few years ago. If the returns are there, if the opportunities are there, if the original philanthropic intent is there, what are the obstacles for other foundations to be able to make that leap into the unknown? There's still that kind of fallacy out there that this is can't be done.
Yeah, so I have to say that was like the biggest head scratcher for me when I left Morgan Stanley. But it's funny as I was leaving, I think I may have told you this joke before, but when I was leaving, a colleague, hey, tells me, hey, did you hear the one about the Lung Cancer Prevention Foundation? They made a killing in tobacco stocks. He's saying you realize you're going into a place where the endowment, the investment, and the program are completely separate. And I just, until I got inside, it wasn't. It was just. I've just found it. I still find it shocking to some extent. Until I did a lot of reading about just human nature and psychology and neuroscience and inertia and comfort and fear and all those things because they all contribute, in my opinion, to the collective illusion that generates an automatic response that when you think about doing something good, it means you can't make as much money doing it. That is, I literally just spoke with someone who manages tens of billions a couple of weeks ago. And I just said, hey, what do you think of when you think of impact investing? Oh, I don't think it should be in an endowment portfolio. We got to worry about our returns, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, are you assuming that you can't generate the appropriate returns for impact investing? And he says, yeah, I mean, how are you going to do it? And then I give him examples. I tell him about our portfolio. And even when, the fascinating thing about people, human nature, is even when you know the facts, it's hard to change your behavior. And there are reasons why people remain stuck in behavior that and assumptions that have no basis in fact. It's kind of like there's a joke about how can you expect that someone will want you to bake a bigger pie when they're used to cutting slices from a single pie, small pie. I can't remember what the exact joke was, but the point is that there are a lot of incentives in place that do not encourage and in fact discourage people from trying something new. And impact investing, unfortunately, is still pretty new because if the system is set up such that as long as you're hugging a specific benchmark, I had a guy, CFA, who explained this to me the other day. If you're hugging a certain benchmark and your compensation is based on some kind of peer group, then you're just going to hug the bench. Why would you try anything different? There's no there's a saying: it's better to fail conventionally than to take the chance of succeeding unconventionally. And I think that explains a lot of behavior. There's fear of, compensation losses. There's fear if you make a mistake, you won't be forgiven. So it's understandable to me that people are afraid.
And there's these assumptions that people take as almost givens. Market rate is one of our favorites, because you have to, and as you said, impact investments can do very well, but to have to hold them to this so-called market rate comparison is comparing them to investments that might have all kinds of negative externalities and extractive practices and all kinds of things that boost that profit rate. But then the impact investment is supposed to match that without being extractive, without having those negative externalities.
I want to stop you because um, there's danger in what you just said. And it's because um, you basically were implying that impact investments, because they do good, they can't achieve market rate, which is the exact thing that I'm trying to disabuse people of. So let's forget about externalities for a minute. That's a completely separate thing. So we should start with impact investing, just like any other type of investing, exists along a spectrum. There's a risk spectrum, which says the expected risk has a correlation with the expected return. The lower the risk, the lower the expected return. The higher the risk, the higher the expected return. Doesn't matter what's impact, doesn't matter what the label is. Now, from a market rate perspective, where things can get a little tripped up is market rate depends on the risk level of the underlying assets, which is an extension of what I just said. But let me give you a very specific example in the private equity sector. So for me, it is flawed. Um, is a flawed definition that says private equity the market rate for private equity is 16 to 18%. I'm just making that up, right? That's, to me, that's completely flawed, because it's a definition that has not talked about the underlying risk of the assets. So, what do I mean by that? The market rate for multifamily affordable rental housing is lower than 16 to 80% because the risk is dramatically lower. So it's more predictable, less volatile, has cash flow, etc. So that's where things get a little tripped up. If I'm doing um, market rate impact investing, I should be targeting the same return as investments that aren't labeled impact investing. What it means is I have less investments to choose from because, as you just said, impact investing is about maximizing positive externalities and minimizing negative externalities. So I have a finer filter, which means a much smaller universe of possible investments. And what that typically means, and you've probably figured it out by now, impact investing is harder. It's we just have to accept it today. It is harder than traditional investing because we have a smaller universe, and that means we have to be that much more rigorous in our analysis. So our analysis includes not just traditional investment analysis, which, by the way, is one reason why I tell young people who are thinking about impact investing is first you got to become an expert in traditional investing. Number one. Number two, I got to think about externalities. I got to think about values. I got to think about reputational risk in ways that are more um, strenuous, because if you're an impact investor, you're under a higher level of scrutiny. So hopefully that kind of
Uh,
clarifies stuff.
yeah, No, and I appreciate the education. I will just say, in my own defense, that I don't think that impact investing requires a haircut from so-called market rate. In fact, impact alpha, the whole name means that there's a alpha in and essentially a positive sum effect in those things. I'm just saying that the benchmark
Great. Okay.
itself is based on
Hmm.
something that includes all these externalities. So
Right.
let's jump
That's right.
into let's jump into externalities. I think you had a remarkable statistic in the book that if you actually took into account all the positives and negatives of publicly traded corporations, like would wipe out more than half of all the earnings if you actually accounted for the actual cost to society, and that something like a third of companies would actually be operating at a loss if you really tallied up their true impact. So the negative externalities are not some sort of marginal case. They're actually uphold much of the market.
Yeah, and this is such a critical issue. This notion of externalities that I frankly, if I paid attention to it in college, it went in one ear and out the other. But now that I'm thinking about human welfare and the common good, I had to understand kind of the mechanisms for externalities, and there are positive and negative. So one of the um, one of the benefits that um, goes to companies that have hard to identify, measure, monitor negative externalities is they can pretty easily do a wealth transfer from society to their shareholders. Let me give you an example that's been in the news a bit. Um, there have been social media companies that basically the way the social media model works is um, fear, anxiety, anger, conflict, hate generate revenues more easily than happier adjectives. Um, and or nouns, or I always get those mixed up. So so basically, if you're trying to generate revenues that benefit from all those bad things, including destructive impact on mental health, then all the costs associated with the mental health, both emotional and financial, all the doctor visits, the anti-anxiety drugs, the costs of unfortunate suicides, the costs of dysfunction, the costs of institutional and social breakdown, government systems breakdown, all that gets transferred to society. It's hidden, and the shareholders benefit. Well, in certain social media situations, that's all coming home to roost. Lawsuits are beginning to be filed, penalties are beginning to be assessed. But that's just one example of the many negative externalities, which are basically wealth transfers, right? Now, let's take a harder example, which is controversial in our world: fossil fuels companies. Um, Fossil fuel companies create a lot of positive externalities, a lot to go along with the negative externalities. My, you know, a lot of my climate friends may not enjoy hearing me say that, but it's true. We wouldn't be able to survive in a healthy way without fossil fuels. If the spigot got turned off today, it'd be really bad for the most of the world. But but we can't ignore the positive externalities, and the benefit of a company that has both positive and negative can come from the advancement of our science and our way of living, so that over time we can decarbonize and we can reduce our reliance on those things. The reason why I spend some time on that is because I think that there have been some really negative impacts on human progress that have to do with the weaponization of certain areas like ESG. ESG, I think that whole sector may have created many of its own problems because of kind of this notion of ratings. So imagine that you're holding down a job, fossil fuel company, you got three kids at home, you're just trying to make ends meet, and you find out that your company got an F. That how do you expect people to react to that? Um, as opposed to the notion of quantifying the externalities. Now, I'm not saying you necessarily would want to net them out, but I'm saying just understand that those same companies that some people demonize are also creating a lot of jobs, economic activity, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why externality is so important. And I'm proud to say that our team has invested in a company, it's a very important company. It's called RGS, Richmond Global Sciences, co-founded by Professor George Seraphim and Sakis Konstantonis. I always get his last name wrong. And it's a company that is going to shine a light on externalities because they're going to quantify the externalities in currency terms. What that does is you go from grading to actually having financial data that you can input into financial models. Now, you can apply the probability ratings of social media companies being more highly regulated or having to internalize some of the costs of the damage they're creating or being taxed or whatever. You can do that. Bottom line is it helps you refine your valuation models. And that's what we like to focus on as much as you can quantify with a healthy dose of common sense. So just like the accounting world and FASB evolved over time from when companies didn't have requirements around their financial information and a lot of the investment work was speculative, this helps you measure and apply probabilities to the ability of a company to monetize its to monetize its positive externalities and the risk it has with the negative externalities.
And I think this feeds into what you called the great illumination, which I promised to get to, in the sense that all the sensors and satellites and even AI and other technology lets us actually see these externalities in much clearer relief now. And so, and you mentioned, methodologies like RGS that can actually quantify it and provide the detail and let folks actually manage the negatives down and the positives up, hopefully. So there is kind of a visibility that's coming to this that might actually redound to this positive sum singularity that's coming.
Yeah, on the notion of the great illumination, and as I say, I like using big inspirational phrases that I hope will inspire energy. And kind of like the patriotic capitalism term I used for a while. But one of the things that I thought about when I'm writing a bonus chapter for my book, and it's on um, Lewis Powell. And what if the Powell memo had been written from a positive sum disposition versus a zero sum disposition? And one of the things I talk about is that the Powell memo was actually um, written and distributed in darkness. It was intended to be confidential. And whenever you're concealing something, whenever you're kind of hiding it, there's a confession underneath that. And one of the great things about quantifying in currency terms externalities is you're now you can no longer hide the actual cost that all of us are paying. We're paying it through our healthcare costs, we're paying it in our tax bill. People complain about taxes. They don't understand that companies are creating jobs, but they're also increasing our taxes. So the more we can leverage, particularly the world of advanced machine learning and what we call artificial intelligence and et cetera, I think it's going to be a great tool to help all of us advance.
Yeah, yeah. I love that the notion of an alternative history, like how everything might have played out if the Powell memo had been written from a positive sum. And I will just commend to the listeners here the chapter on Lewis Powell and the original memo is very illuminating in the sense of how we got here. And as you say, the democracy dies in darkness. I mean, you've sort of articulated the whole theory of change of journalism and which is to bring these things out, and you've done that beautifully in the book. And I think also the bonus chapter, if I'm not mistaken, folks get that with advance ordering, so that's another
Yeah.
incentive for folks to pre-order the book.
And I do want to say on this topic, the pre-ordering, I just want to be clear to everyone because I'm this book I wrote for the Ford Foundation. All proceeds go to the Ford Foundation for our charitable mission. I receive no financial benefits from this book. This was a labor of love. Um, it didn't always feel that way, but that's yeah. So when you buy a copy, you're supporting our charitable mission.
I just want to take you back. You mentioned patriotic capitalism. I know there's a chapter in it, but as I was talking with you over the years as you were working on it, I think you were originally going to call the book Patriotic Capitalism, and it's obviously timely in this
Yeah.
bicentennial year we're in. But so there really is kind of a patriotic mission and a kind of theme running through it. So just tell us how you thought about patriotic capitalism.
Yeah, this goes back to my attempt to find a term that could diffuse political polarization and get people focused on the actual aim of our economic system and how we invest our capital. And I thought the term patriotic was imbued with such positive feelings across the political spectrum that it would be really hard to weaponize that. Now, I wasn't completely right. There are some people who react negatively, even in this country, to the term patriotic because I think some people attribute that term to a certain collective that they may not be included in, but I still think it was a good term to use. Now, the next thing I'll say is that term, for some reason, is also very closely linked with the US. And patriotism is really about love of country and a desire to take care of your country. And I don't mean that from a nationalist perspective. I mean it from the perspective of the flight attendant who is explaining before the plane takes off that if you lose cabin pressure and oxygen, a mask will come down. Put on your mask first. And after you put on your mask, you can then help others. And so that's the case for every country is you have to take care of your country before you can help others in a meaningful way. Now that does not mean that if your country is not perfect, you can't help others because we're all in this together. We're all humans, we're all people who inhabit the same planet. But what it means is, and this is my definition of patriotic capitalism, it's and in this case, investing in the best interest of country, democracy, and the common good. And all of that will enable the greatest possible freedom in a collective where we also owe each other a duty to one another so that our freedoms don't encroach on other freedoms, but collectively we are as free as we can possibly be. So that's the spirit of it. And I shifted it to positive sum because I didn't want a book title. This book is meant to appeal globally. Ford Foundation's footprint is US and Global South, but it's meant to, and I actually have a chapter, as you may remember, on the church commissioners for England. So I bring in sort of the Church of England in a very I think it's a positive way ultimately. In relation to their sponsorship of the transatlantic chattel slave trade and what the church commissioners did in acknowledgement of that, kind of a look back and saying, hey, we can create a better world by creating an impact investing fund that makes everyone's future brighter. And that's an acknowledgement of the centuries that we supported, turning people into property. The story can have a better ending. And that's ultimately what it's all about. And positive sum shifts it from a word that can be seen as being attributable to just one country or one geography, because math is a universal message. Math is a universal language.
That's great, and the Church of England story is very well told and super interesting in the book, and I think that's a good place to leave it, Roy. I encourage everybody to read Positive Sum by Roy Swan, and thank you, Roy, for the book, and thank you for your continued partnership with ImpactAlpha and all your work that you do for all of us. So really appreciate you joining us today.
David, always a pleasure and a privilege. Thank you.
That's going to do it for this Agents of Impact podcast. Big thanks to Roy, to our producer Isaac Silk, to the whole team at ImpactAlpha, and to all of you, Agents of Impact, with deep gratitude for all that you do.